Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we really get into the skin of the race weekend. We're calling this one DRS Zone, F1 Rules Under Fire.
Yeah, because Mexico City. Wow. It promised that high-altitude drama, didn't it?
It absolutely did,
Yeah.
but maybe not quite the drama we were hoping for. Less about pure racing, more about, well, the rule book.
Yeah.
It felt like a potential classic got tangled up in procedures.
That's exactly what we found looking through the analysis. You see this pattern, this paradox almost. The rules seem to, encourage drivers to push right to the edge, maybe even over it.
Right.
And then when things get messy as a result, the penalties clamp down hard on the procedural side of things, not the initial aggression.
So we're going to break down three key moments.
Exactly. The start, that overtake, and the penalty that followed. It all centers on how these racing regulations are being applied or maybe misapplied.
Okay, let's dive straight in. The start. Max Verstappen, he's on the medium tires, harder compound, less grip initially.
Yeah, compared to the Ferraris, the Mercedes on the softs, big disadvantage off the line.
So he goes into turn one, locks up pretty heavily, trying to hang on.
A huge lockup. Flat spotted the tire, clearly missed the corner. But instead of, wrestling it back onto the track and losing time,
He just takes the scenic route.
pretty much takes the escape road, bypasses turn 2, bypasses turn 3 entirely. And where does he rejoin?
P4. Ahead of George Russell, who he started behind.
Correct. Gained a place by missing the corner.
And the official word from the stewards was no action. They were okay with that.
They found it correctly applied, apparently, which, well, raises questions, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, isn't an escape road meant to be slower? A penalty in itself. The analysis we saw suggested this came way too easily for him.
That was the term used very free. Gratis, almost. Look, he was forced wide initially, sure, but the way that runoff is designed, he lost basically no time, recovered the position, even gained one.
That feels like a failure in circuit design or rule application, right?
Yeah.
If you fail to make the corner, you shouldn't benefit.
It absolutely violates the spirit of it,
Yeah.
and that's why the sources we looked at are calling for changes. Things like mandatory time loss systems.
Like they have elsewhere.
Yeah, think Barcelona or the second chicane at Monza. You've got those bollards, specific re-entry lines. You have to lose time or give back the position if you cut the corner.
Otherwise, what's stopping drivers just firing it in there, knowing the escape road is a get-out-of-jail-free card?
Exactly. There's no downside to overcooking it if the recovery is that easy. It needs fixing.
Okay, so that's the start. Problematic, but maybe not the biggest flashpoint. Let's move to the moment everyone was talking about. Verstappen's move on Hamilton, turn one again later in the race.
Ah, yes. The dive bomb, described as him throwing himself from miles away.
That looked incredibly aggressive. So let's get technical. What's the actual rule here? How do the stewards decide who owns the corner in that situation?
Okay, this is where it gets, well, very specific. The current regulation, the interpretation they're using now, it hinges on the position of the attacking car's front axle relative to the defender's car.
Front axle versus the mirror. Is that right?
Yeah, the rearview mirror, effectively. At the apex of the corner, if Verstappen's front axle is level with or ahead of Hamilton's mirror at the apex, the rule says the corner belongs to Verstappen.
That sounds incredibly precise, like millimeter stuff.
It basically is. If you meet that tiny criterion, the attacker has the right to the racing line. The defender is expected to yield.
And the FIA's ruling on this one was also no further action or racing incident. Was that purely based on that axle measurement?
Pretty much, yes. Their statement said Verstappen was clearly ahead by that metric at the apex, so he had the right to the line. And then there's the other crucial bit.
The contact. Because they definitely touched.
They did. A proper wheel bang. But the stewards decided it didn't have sporting consequences.
Meaning what? No punctures, no broken wings?
Exactly. Nobody spun, nobody lost significant time directly because of the contact itself. So, racing incident. Move on.
Okay, but this is where, it gets really frustrating for a lot of people watching. If that rule is interpreted so literally, it means the attacker doesn't actually have to leave any room, do they?
That's the core of the criticism. If you've got your front wheel alongside their mirror, the implication is you can push them wide, and it's on the other driver, Hamilton in this case, to avoid a bigger crash.
Feels like it encourages a different style of racing. Less clean wheel-to-wheel, more elbows out.
That's precisely the language used in the analysis, driving with elbows. Almost like touring cars, TC2000 was mentioned, where leaning on each other is just part of the game.
So it's replacing that classic F1 style, think Montoya, Schumacher, where there was Hard racing, but usually, an attempt to keep it on the track.
It seems to be shifting that way. Those older battles, there was an understanding, maybe an unwritten rule about leaving space, respecting your rival. This new interpretation, it shifts the responsibility entirely onto the driver being overtaken. Attackers are incentivized to be hyper-aggressive. One source called it a defeat for motorsports.
And if you're watching this on YouTube, welcome to DRS Zone. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more deep dives into F1 rules and controversies. Seeing that Hamilton-Verstappen move visually really drives home what we're talking about here.
It absolutely does. And it highlights this other really worrying aspect, judging incidents based on the outcome.
The consequence paradox, you called it earlier.
Exactly. If Hamilton had broken his wing or got a puncture from that contact, Verstappen likely would have been penalized. But because both cars survived relatively unscathed,
The move itself is deemed okay,
yeah,
even though the action was identical.
right. It makes the application of penalties feel random. It depends on luck, almost,
Right.
rather than the inherent danger or unfairness of the move itself.
Which leads us perfectly into the third big moment, the ultimate irony, maybe. The aggressive move goes unpunished, but the aftermath gets slammed. Hamilton's penalty.
A 10-second penalty, yeah. So after that contact at turn 1 forced him wide, Hamilton cut across the grass between turns 4 and 5.
And got it with 10 seconds. Why? He was pushed off the circuit.
But here comes the procedure again. He didn't follow the exact re-entry route laid out in the race director's notes. You know those specific instructions about going around a bollard or staying to one side of a painted line if you cut a corner?
Seriously? There's a specific map for cutting the grass.
Effectively, yes. For certain corners with runoffs, there's a mandated way back onto the track to ensure you don't gain an advantage. The stewards ruled he gained an advantage by not following this prescribed path.
But wait a minute. How is cutting across the grass ever an advantage compared to staying on the racing line he was forced off of?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The argument is that by not following the specific slow route back, he didn't definitively give up the position to Verstappen and maybe didn't lose as much time relative to, say, Russell behind him as he should have.
So the rulebook is laser-focused on the re-entry procedure violation, even though that violation only happened because of the initial unpenalized contact.
That's precisely it. They are incredibly strict on these procedural things. Track limits, re-entry lines, safety car protocols, sometimes seemingly detached from the racing context that led to the situation. It's like the system sees the rulebook infraction in isolation.
And Verstappen's defense just sums it all up, doesn't it?
It really does. He basically said, and you can't really argue with his logic under the current rules, if the rules allow me to push them wide, why wouldn't I?
Wow. So the drivers know. They understand the loophole or the feature, depending on how you look at it.
They have to. It actively encourages pushing rivals out, knowing that as long as you meet that tiny technical requirement at the apex and maybe get a bit lucky with consequences, you're fine. It prioritizes that aggressive self-interest over any kind of racing etiquette or respect.
And this isn't just a one-off, is it? We hear about inconsistencies all the time. Monaco being judged differently because of the walls.
Right, the consequence argument again. A move that's okay at a trap with huge runoff might get penalized at Monaco simply because the consequences of contact are higher. But surely the driving standards should be the same everywhere? The rules shouldn't change based on whether there's a wall nearby. It feels broken.
So let's bring it towards the end of the race, all this controversy, and then we had the virtual safety car laid on.
Yeah, the VSC. Carlos Sainz pulls over, brakes gone, in the Forosol section.
Looked mostly off the track, though. Did it really need a VSC? Kind of neutralized that potential fight for P2 between Leclerc and Verstappen.
That was the immediate reaction, yeah. Did it kill the race?
But the VSC isn't really about the racing, is it? It's about safety, specifically marshal safety.
The legacy of Jules Bianchi's accident.
Directly. The rule is clear. If marshals need to go near the track or onto it to recover a car or debris, the VSC or safety car comes out. Period.
And did they need to go on track for Sainz? It seems so. Although he was mostly off, recovering a car often requires marshals to be in potentially vulnerable positions. And crucially, there was footage, quite alarming actually, of marshals crossing the track under double-waved yellows just before the VSC was deployed.
Really? So that confirms the danger was real, maybe even highlights a communication lag.
It suggests the VSC was absolutely necessary for safety, regardless of the impact on the racing. It underlines that marshal safety protocol is paramount, but it still feeds into this wider sense of governance struggles.
How so?
Well, it loops back to the main theme, F1 management, the race direction, they seem to be struggling, particularly since 2021, to find consistent, common-sense applications of the rules. The current framework seems to box the stewards into these very literal technical interpretations.
Which leads to outcomes that just feel wrong.
Yeah.
Like penalizing Hamilton for the re-entry, not the initial put.
Exactly. It feels unjustifiable to many. The system prioritized a procedural infraction over the aggressive driving that caused the whole situation. It's valuing the letter of the law over the spirit of racing.
So the Mexico GP really put it under the microscope, a rule book that seems to favor, well, using your elbows, sticking to technicalities, rather than rewarding clean, respectful racing.
It creates this environment where drivers are almost forced to be hyper-aggressive and exploit every nuance of the regulations because that's what gets rewarded, or at least not punished.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty challenging thought, doesn't it? If the rules, as they stand, reward the driver who pushes their rival off track, who uses the rule book to the absolute max, does the next F1 champion simply have to be the driver most willing to exploit those rules to push things even further until the governing body is finally forced to step in and fundamentally change things back towards protecting the racing itself?
That's the tightrope they're walking, and it could well define who comes out on top.
Something to definitely think about. Thanks for diving deep into that mess with us today. If you appreciated this breakdown trying to make sense of the F1 rule book, make sure you follow and subscribe to The Deep Dive. We'll keep digging into the stories behind the headlines.
Catch you on the next one.